Today I want to talk to you about prodigals, and this is a song called Prodigal.
Well, I've been round the bend, chasing phantoms and spending the heart of my life on passing fancies, looking to find a reason, a rhyme on the wind. And I've tried to forget, but something won't let me, 'cause I've tasted the best and still gone hungry. In the back of my mind, it's you all the time I see. Hoping, praying, you've always been there waiting for me.
This is the heart of a prodigal song, and you'll see why I'm playing it.
I've wandered far from home, running all the while from the one love I should have known would meet you each
Awesome. We've got a divine appointment group today, but I want you to hear the rest of this song, Prodigal. Your prodigal heart, your kid's prodigal heart, right?
Yes, I've wandered far from home, running all the while from the one love I should have known would meet you across each line. Yeah, I've been round the bend, chasing phantoms and spending the heart of my life on passing fancies, looking to find a reason, a rhyme on the wind. And I've tried to forget, but something won't let me, 'cause I've tasted the best and still gone hungry. In the back of my mind, it's you all the time I still see.
God's reaching for the prodigals, and I'm going to tell you how He's going to do it with your help.
Hoping, praying, you've always been there waiting. Now I'm hoping, praying, you'll still be there waiting for me.
That's the moment of the prodigal, is when you run and run and run from the love you know is after you because of pain and anger or whatever it is. And the moment when you realize that there's something in you that wants to go home, there's that second when you wonder, will they be still waiting for me? Will they still be waiting for me? Will the door still be open? Is the grace still there? It's a sweet little moment before a prodigal returns home or on the way back. And I want to talk to you today about why we are the key to the prodigals. And I want to encourage you, and I've said this before, but it seemed to be, hey Andrea, it seemed to be very divine appointment-ishy today, okay? I want to talk to you about, we talked about investing in your fear-free life and why that's so important and why you need to have an investment mindset, investing in your brain, in what it's going to take to change, right? I've talked about that, but I want to talk about why investing in your fear-free life is the key to your prodigals very often in your family, especially your children. You see, it's because of our pain and our addiction and our unhealthy relationships. Can you guys still hear me? Are we still there? I turned off that notification, but I want to make sure you still hear my voice. If that muted everything. No, I think we're good. The thing is that very often we come into the world with so much pain and trauma and brokenness, fear, anxiety, old thinking. Hey, Iceman, we see these things unfolding in us, and we're just trying to get through life, right? And what do? You think that maybe God would like wait until we're all fixed before we get a license to reproduce. But it's this strange thing about how God allows us to reproduce, to give birth, to bring forth another generation right smack dab in the middle of all of our neuroses. Isn't that the weirdest thing? And yet somehow it is in the process of having kids and having that take you to the very end of yourself and take you past your pain and to realizing what you're missing as a person and as a parent, that very often brings you to the point where you're compelled to do things you wouldn't normally do for the sake of your kids, right? So of course we do that to make sure usually that they got a roof over their head, and that the child locks are on everything, and we're going to keep them safe. We're going to do all these things to make sure our kids are going to be okay, and we're going to get them to school. We're going to get them in the right school. We're going to get them in all the sports and all this stuff, and make sure they do the prom, and whatever that is, or I got to have the best Christmas, and we're doing all these things for our kids, assuming that somehow we're not reproducing pain. But the number one thing we need to do for our children is to get free of fear and pain. And that's the thing they're actually waiting for us to do. I firmly believe that we hold the keys very often to the prodigal kids in our lives, because they're waiting for the authority figures in their lives to have authenticity through and through our beings, who we are. And so very often we're the reason why our kids don't believe in God. We're the reason why our kids have thrown Jesus under the bus, and church under the bus, and religion under the bus. Now, don't get me wrong. The school system is largely a brainwashing system. It's an indoctrination system for secularism, social influence, and liberalism, basically. And we can go into it. Even the most neutralish schools wind up generally reproducing people with a leftist mindset. And there's lots of reasons for that. So I don't consider, generally speaking, it a safe environment to just send your kids off and assume they're going to come back to you intact and ready to talk with you about the values that you hold dear, unless they're the same ones they're getting in the school. So that does undermine faith and relationship, because even if you agree politically with what they're getting in the system through media, entertainment, and schools, right? They may not want to even have a deeper relationship with you because you don't have the structural integrity that they admire. And this is where I need you to hear me, that the prodigal issues very often related to God or related to mom and dad. Now, this isn't to beat us up, because, look, we all do the best we can. But the thing of it is that when we are broken and then we cope through addiction, control, lack of boundaries, unhealthy relationships with the church, bad marriages, or marriages that are compliant families where people are just basically not really speaking to what's going on, but we're complying with one another, we're keeping the system going. Our kids, crap falls down the hill, and our kids are watching and picking up on whether there's structural integrity in our souls and in our families. And I think maybe the number one reason why our kids don't believe in God is because they haven't seen the dynamic healing wholeness in our personalities and in our marriages and in our interactions that are deeply attractive to them. And they are wondering why, if we say that our values are the best and God and country and the Constitution. Why are we so screwed up? Why is dad, a rageaholic? Why is mom drinking? Why are you not? Why are you conflict avoidant? Why don't we really talk about what's going on? Why do mom and dad not really connect? Why is there stuff going on that is fritzing out the relationships? And they're testing us, and they're wanting to know if we're really authentic. And if it's funny because in my day, we were just beginning to ask questions, and you weren't supposed to ask these kinds of questions of your parents because it was all about respect, and you give respect no matter what, and they're the authorities, and that's just how it rolls. And then came along, Phil, what's his head? The first guy with the talk show, Donahue. Then came along Phil Donahue, putting a microphone in everybody's mouth, up to everybody's mouth, and saying, "What do you think? What do you think in the audience? What do you think?" And it became the whole culture of disclosure and the therapy culture, and so forth. People began to unpack how in the 1950s, the June Cleaver world wasn't so perfect. Husbands had come home from the war with very damaged and wounded. Families believed in the Ten Commandments, but they never taught their kids why. It was all about, this is the way it's always been. We're just going to always believe this. We're always going to have trust authority figures, trust the police, trust your teachers. We're all in this together. We share the same values. Don't ask any questions. Of course, we're a Christian nation, of course. And what was happening was we were being infiltrated by the left, by communism, by socialism, and all of our media and institutions. In the meantime, at our tables, because that happened in the 1940s, 1950s, right? Project Mockingbird and the CIA and Operation Paperclip and bringing the Nazis in, and then progressive education. Our education schools were infiltrated by the left. Xanax was big in the 50s. That's right. Mom could come to the door in high heels with perfect hair, but maybe she was on Xanax. Maybe dad was down at the Rotary Club and he was a fine, upstanding man who mowed his lawn, every week, but maybe he was an alcoholic. Maybe there was abusiveness. Maybe there was sexual abuse. But we had the Ten Commandments on the wall, and we went to church. So we made a lot of assumptions. And so while those systems were falling apart and there was pain, right, the 50s parents gave birth to the 60s kids who weren't having it. So we're going along with a structurally unsound, inauthentic family structure based on pain and not really asking questions, and an inauthentic church structure where we all went and we all agreed that this is how it was. In the meantime, in come the socialists and the anarchists and the sexual anarchists and the Eastern mystics, and they just come and they just bring in their waves and pull the foundations right out from under this kind of little decent-looking family structure, right? So we grew up in that, and then we began to ask questions, and in the 70s and 80s began the idea of the psyche and what's going on in the person, and by this time AA, which started much earlier in the 20th century, was now becoming a more accepted thing. Then we have our leaders go off to the Betty Ford Center because guess who was an alcoholic? Well, Betty Ford. Guess who our heroes were? It's coming out. It's kind of all coming undone, right? But my generation, perhaps yours, we were just coming to terms with that. I personally found that when the church began to understand these things and support recovery and begin to have discussions about the power of the Holy Spirit, which happened again in the 1960s and 70s, and the Spirit came and there became these healing ministries. So some of us began to think, maybe God wants to heal the soul, right? Well, we fast forward into our child rearing. They're asking questions all the time from the very second, and they don't mind reflecting back to us when we're not being real. I mean, even now, I think I'm a pretty amazing parent. I got to tell you, I think I've worked through a lot of stuff. I think I'm really present. I think that I've shown up. I think that where we failed, we've gone back. We've worked through things. We've done forgiveness. We've counseled with one another and others if we've needed to. And still today, my son and kids will have no problem whatsoever bringing up something to me about their experience that created a problem for them. They don't have any problem with that. They're calling me out. They're saying, Mom, you used to do this, and I don't really want to do that. And even though I see a lot of value in what I did, and I know why I did it, and I'd do it again, they're not having any problems questioning authority, are they? And so don't kid yourself, we're not getting away with anything. We are not getting away with anything with these kids. And as they're being tested from without by the social programming, the anti-God bias, the secularism, the sexual anarchy, that sex is anything, any two, three, five people want to do should be just fine together. They're getting all of that, and it's sending the waves into under our foundations. And we may think that we're getting away with things, but I just want you to know we're not. They're seeing everything, and they're seeing whether we're structurally authentic in the family. They're seeing whether our marriages are really fruitful, that we like our spouses, that we hang out. They're seeing whether we are resilient and happy people. They're watching to know whether we deal with our shit. They're watching to know whether we can have hard conversations, whether we can own that, whether we can hear their reflections and the reflections of others. And when we're presenting God to them, and values and conservatism and patriotism or whatever we think we're bringing, and they're not seeing structural integrity in our souls, our marriages, our families, the way we deal with things, and when they see us leaving the field and running away from confrontation and not showing up, they're paying attention. And I think very often our pain and our undealt with issues are probably the number one reason why our kids don't believe in God. I don't think, yes, is there a big influence coming from without? There is. There is. And the degree to which we dropped them off every day in an institution and didn't pay attention and didn't realize that for 6 or 8 hours a day they were being programmed to have a new family, which is their peers, and new values and new things. Bad on us, frankly. We have to own that we were asleep at the wheel, and we just bought the idea, that we were all on the same page culturally, and we could send our kids off to church and off to school, and they'd come home intact, okay? But we set the table for dealing with those things based on our emotional integrity. And so I believe, think of it this way. I'm going to take you back in the Wayback Machine for a minute. You know what you grew up with. You know what your parents tried to do. You know what they did do. You know where they failed you. You know where they honored you. You know that maybe you just love them and you're crazy about them, but they, not, the lights were on, but nobody was home. Or maybe they were fabulous. It was fabulous, but you know what you inherited. Okay? Let me ask you this question. How valuable would it be to you if your parents were ever able to come to you one-on-one as humans and adults and say, I just want to acknowledge that I brought into my parenting these things that I've become aware of, these wounds, these issues, and my wounds are not your responsibility, but here's what I brought in, and here's how I responded. Here's how this affected my ability to love you unconditionally and be there and speak truth. This is how this affected our marriage. This is how I found myself withdrawing and retreating from relationship. This is how I projected onto God and set an example of an unhealthy relationship with God. This is how I wound up being in abusive church situations. This is where I came from, and I'm seeing now that all these things affected how I lived and how I parented and how I did marriage and family life and church and the whole thing. And I'm coming to you to acknowledge that hurt you. And I want you to know I see it, and I want to hear your perspective. How did my failed responses to the pain in my life affect you? What would that have been worth to you if your parents had had any capacity whatsoever to admit what you saw as a kid, to tell you where they learned it came from, and to admit that it affected you, and to validate that it affected you, and validate that you had pain? Now, maybe you had wonderful parents and it was this and that, but still, how valuable would it have been to you if your parents could have had conversations with you about their interior life, even if you don't have a big wounded growth experience in your family? How valuable would it have been to you if your parents had been able to articulate, this is what I brought into the world, what came into the world with me, this is how I dealt with it, this is how I affected, this is how God brought me through it? Maybe. What if you had the stories of how they would have been, how they got where they got? Maybe they're godly, angelic people, but wouldn't it have been valuable to you to know how they owned their process? Would have been priceless, right? And how about that validation that came to you and said, to say to you, I hurt you, and I think maybe we have enough relationship for me to say that I didn't mean to, but here's how I hurt you, and I want to hear your pain. I want to hear, can you talk to me about that? And how valuable would it have been if your family had had the language of forgiveness, which we talked about last week, that true forgiveness is a legal act of possession and depossessing bitterness? How valuable would it have been, Amy Messner, if your parents had said to you, I was wrong, I hurt you, will you forgive me? What if that had been language in your family? Now, fortunately, my father, as a pastor who had foibles, and we had issues in our family of addiction and stuff, and I've referenced that in the past. But when he understood what forgiveness was, he began to teach it to his church in the 70s, and we were actually in a revival in the 70s, and he began to teach about inner healing and teach. Now, he didn't totally get all inner healed, which is interesting, but he got, oh yes, they were very healing, Andrea, I'm sure. But he understood, when he understood how healing worked and the legal issues of healing, he began to teach it, and he grabbed everything he could. So he passed it on to me. So from about the age of 16, I learned the language of forgiveness. And then I had a huge catharsis right around that time with deep pain relating to my brother and sister, who I felt terribly rejected by and bitter toward. And he had us as a church go through and list out through our lives in years who had hurt us the most and literally walk through forgiveness. It was life-changing. And that became a deliverance ministry, because when you forgive and you do that, you get delivered of demons. Hello. So imagine it would have been changed your life if you'd had the language of forgiveness, so that whatever you analyzed about what happened to you and your parents' responsibility and yours, you had a method to deal with it. You had the ability to close off your soul to bitter and demonic spirits and strongholds through forgiveness. What would it have been worth to you if they had said to you, and guess what? I've learned how to be emotionally healed. Guess what? I've learned some simple things by interacting with the Holy Spirit, and here's a resource, and here's some things about breaking vows. Wow. And bitter root, and here's 3 simple steps to emotional healing to get your memories healed. Or if you really got wackadoodle demons, here's some other resources. What would it have been worth to you if your parents had been able to just own their shit and sit down with you and go, here it is, here's what I did, I acknowledge this, I validate your feelings, I want to hear from you, will you forgive me, here's how we can get that healed. What would it have been worth? And finally, what would it have been worth to you if you had heard these words come out of your mom or your dad's mouth? Let me tell you the words. No matter what I've done in the past, no matter how much time I've wasted, I determine that by the time I die, I'm going to be the most whole and healthy and happy person you know, and loving person. What would it have been worth to you if your parents had declared, I screwed up, I was an SOB, I cheated on my husband, I was this, I was that, I was the other thing, I wrecked you. You have issues. I did these things. But now I have tools, and I promise you, I'm at a stake in the ground between now and the time I die. I'm going to become the healthiest, happiest, holiest, most loving person you know. Watch me. What would that have been worth to you? And what would it have done to your walk with God? Do you think that would have affected your walk with God? Pick the worst parent. Pick the sexual abuser. Pick the serial alcoholic. Pick the rageaholic. Pick the physical abuser. Pick whatever it is. Pick the person you least expect to ever get well. And think of all the fallout that they've left in your lap. And imagine that they made the commitment to say, by the time I die, you're going to see a different soul on this earth. Would that have built your faith after all the damage? Now, would you have believed them at first? This is what I want to say. Would you have believed them at first? I think these conversations roll out over time, but they need to have specific qualities to them that are repetitive themes along the lines I've just outlined to you when I said, would it have been worth to you this, this, and this? You, if you'd been very, very damaged by such a parent, I don't think at first you would have trusted them, liked them, believed what they said. But you would have paid attention. And if they continued down that consistent road of, I take responsibility, this is what happened to me, I acknowledge it, I'm dealing with those roots, I'm getting forgiven, and I want to validate your pain, and I want to hear from you as things continue to come up, and I want to have the language of forgiveness, and I want to be a person who shows you what healing looks like, and here's some resources. And I determine that I'm not going to stay this way. Do you think that over time, if there was an unrelenting commitment on the part of even the most abusive parent, that the soul of the child would not open to God, to healing, to possibility? What if, my friends, your kids don't believe you now, and they don't believe in your God, and they don't believe in your constitutional whatever, and they're blowing smoke up your shorts? Ask yourself if you are becoming, by choice, the most whole, healed, happy, loving, holy person they know. Ask yourself if your commitment has been that whatever it takes you, you're going to take an inventory of your life and what crap landed, what shit landed on your front porch, and how you dealt with it or didn't deal with it, how it affected you, how it affected your marriage, your core relationships, your personality, how you wound up being addicted to your own pain and addicted to your own fear and sitting back in the sidelines letting someone else live your life for you. If you're, imagine taking that and saying, and then validating your kids. And showing up and doing it over and over and over as a lifestyle, a life skill for the rest of your life. Will you screw it up? Will you mess it up? Are you a mess? Yes, but what else do you have to do with the next 50 years of your life? And I don't believe you now. I don't believe you yet. Very often. I don't believe in your God yet. I don't believe in your Constitution yet. I don't believe in a limited government yet. But what if we determine to learn the life skill of being whole and healed and happy and present, and we don't give up, and we just say, it doesn't matter, I'm going to get there, and I might fail. People around us may not believe us for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years. But what else are you going to do? Just keep giving them reasons not to? Let's give them reasons to believe in our God. Let's give them reason. And the number one reason our kids need is their parents. I have a friend whose son got really, really hurt in the church. He's one of the most brilliant scientists. Harvard graduated, and he's hanging by a thread with his faith. And he said to his parents, I can't deny God because I've seen how you live. And we're not just talking about their theology or their religious practice. We're talking about their reality. And he knows that those parents, actually, the father is an Anglican priest, amazing couple. And he knows that they've gotten shafted and screwed and hurt and betrayed so many times. It's actually kind of, I think, hard for him to wonder, that God you believe in. That's kind of, he's understanding that, right? But he sees consistently his parents come back to love, to speak the truth, to have emotional and mental integrity. And they're not doormats, and they take care of business, and they set boundaries, and they say no, and they say yes, but they also pour their lives out for others. And apparently this kid young man, he cannot give up because he's seen his parents. Maybe that's not true for you. It's not entirely true for me yet because I have a lot of stuff I have to deal with. In my life, I'll be very transparent with you. A couple years ago, I said to my oldest son, who they always seem to notice the most, right? He's the most sensitive, the one who tries the hardest. And I said, you saw me and my relationship with your dad. I just want you to know, before this thing is all over, said and done, I'm going to become the kind of wife, when you stand over my casket, when I didn't raise from the dead, but you tried, and I decided not to come back because I was having too much fun in heaven, that you can say, my mom really loved and respected my dad. Now, to say that, it means I had to admit that I hadn't really loved and respected their father. Do you see how important it is that we become healed and whole, and we're not defined by fear, which is triggered by pain and wounding? Do you get it? Do you see? Don't be the reason why your kids don't believe in God. Maybe you've already got that great relationship with them. Maybe go deeper. Continue on, because life is going to bamboozle them, and they're going to come against betrayal that shocks them, and they're going to be betrayed by the people they least expected, or it's not called betrayal. And it probably is going to come from the people that should never do it, the authority figures that should never betray. It's going to come on the national stage when we find out which of our missionary organizations has been trafficking children, which of our senators and business leaders and pastors have been involved in corruption. And it's going to come when your local pastor is the Saul and not the David, or your business partner screws you over, or your family members. And we want to stay in that place with those kids, of modeling the language of forgiveness, healing, integrity, authenticity. So we give them the experience of that in relationship, so they have resilience when they're tempted to throw Jesus under the bus. All right, you guys. Get well, get healthy, do stuff that scares you all the time, every day. Push the limits a little bit. I leave the house and I don't want to be out. I don't want to be out of the house. Thank God my husband loves doing errands. I'm going to make myself go and try. You can do the same thing. Look, you're totally worth it, and your family's worth it, and the kingdom of God is worth it, and you really don't have anything better to do with the next 50 years of your life. So are you in with both feet? I hope so. I will see